everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the ColdCast. I'm your host, Dr. Anna Johnson, and today I'm so excited because we have my colleague, Eddie Russell, here to talk about the project management organization. This is near and dear to my heart because I look after it, and so we get to have a conversation about basically what we do on a daily basis. Right. So I'd like to introduce you guys to Eddie Russell. He's our Senior Project Specialist and Program Owner. So welcome to the ColdCast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your background. So you started out as a co-op, right?
Yeah, in the Voorhees office.
Okay. And so how long did you do that?
I was in the transportation department.
Okay.
It was one of those 6-month co-ops.
Okay.
I, at the time, was a student at Temple University. And I think it ended in the summer.
Okay.
Or in December.
Okay. So really about that time, we started incubating the PMO. And so you came into this as kind of a project lead, right? Focused on transportation. So give us an example of a few projects that you've worked on.
Yeah. So I think I'd actually, even to bring it back, I'd start with a project even before I was in the PMO, right? I think I always like to tell this story because it was our first national RFP.
Okay.
And it was 2019, right? The market had just flipped from carrier market to
because of the
market.
pandemic. Right.
And at that time, it was kind of one of those first projects that got me excited about project management, right?
And what made you get excited about that?
I think part of it was that it was such a big win.
Okay.
And a lot of that had to do with market conditions.
Right.
But it was fun to kind of set up that initial process.
Right.
And really, interact with our carrier base. And at that time I was working out in Wilmington, Illinois. That was kind of one of my favorite first projects.
Right. I like to say everything is a project. So a project really has, it's kind of distinct because it has a beginning and it has an end, right? So it's this finite thing that exists. But no matter where you are in business, whether you're in transportation, warehousing, procurement, actually Brian Murphy and I talked a little bit about procurement and projects. There are these basic project acumen things that you can take away and apply, right?
Absolutely. Yep. And then Four Kites was a very fun one. That's our freight tracking and visibility tool for the consolidation program. It's essentially a product that allows us to track where trucks are on the road. And gives us recommendations on, ETAs and recommendations on appointments, things like that.
So when we implemented Four Kites, they came at us with the technology, right? So then how did did you build out a plan on how you were going to roll it out to all of our different, business units? How do you think about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, when the product got brought to us, and really we were probably looking for the product.
Right.
I think in terms of an implementation plan, the strategy that we took was starting with our highest volume carriers. Okay. Right. Let's start with, hey, where can we have the most impact with the carriers that have the technology that will allow us to track. Okay. I think from there, we started to look at, where the best places to start regionally were. Midwest being kind of the highest volume regions and some very important customers in that region. So really just taking, a prioritized approach. So
it's really not just implementing the software, but understanding the business process. And you being in transportation, I think was helpful because you understand, what those requirements are, what they should be, and, kind of how to do that, right?
Yeah. You need to bring in the right people at the right time and understand, the things that you know and the things that you don't know. Yeah. Bringing in that experience is definitely an important part of any project.
And then talk to me a little bit about how projects get started in the PMO.
Sure. Yeah. I think practically speaking, right, it's with the initiation phase of a project, right? You go and, you build a business case, hopefully. And from there, you start with your charter and try to understand the scope, the budget, right?
The resources,
who's going to be involved.
Yep.
There's all that practical stuff, but I think from a personal approach, I really have started taking this human-centric design, approach to almost everything that I do. And that really is just starting with people, right? Understanding that any product or service or process is going to impact people, and they need to be at the center of that.
Right. So there's a big change management element to it as well. And I think, and I think what we've done as being part of the PMO is really being able to bring people along, because that really does help with the change that they're going to go through and the process they're going to experience. So one example of where I think you've done a really good job of bringing people along is around the new customer portal. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the new customer portal is a project we started really a couple of years ago.
Yes, it's been a long time in the making.
It's with the justification, right, and the planning.
Right.
But it's something we really started getting going this year. And we started with this design practice where we built a team, a pretty diverse team of customer service folks from around the country
who could potentially also be using the system, right?
Yes,
I mean, they don't today, but certainly they have the capacity to be able to use it.
Yeah. And identifying some key customers, right?
Yep, some stakeholders.
And starting to rethink the whole product, right? Really trying to innovate in that space and make it a differentiator for US Cold.
Right.
But in terms of how we brought people along, right? It was through this process of this human-centric design where we were engaging and designing for them and with them, really at every phase of the process.
Right. And so you kind of have brought them along so that, at the end of it all, when they see the output, they had ownership and influence on what the product is.
Yeah.
And so that way they're more likely to adopt it or to evangelize it because they were responsible.
They built it.
Right.
Yeah.
They built it, which is very cool.
Yeah.
And that's what we do. We build systems, we build products, and everything's a project. So I feel like, us being able to step in and show them some of that skill and building that muscle will just benefit us in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we talked a little bit about the PMO is really meant to, it's not compulsory. Like people don't have to go through the PMO, right? You want to be part of the PMO because we can walk alongside you and provide provide assistance, provide business acumen that they may not have or they may not have time for, right? And so, when a new project comes in, and whether we've heard, like it kind of gets initiated, but because you've worked in the transportation space, you have those contacts already out there. Right. So you're aware of projects, right? Yeah. Because oftentimes, unless it's capital budgeted, no one tells anybody that there's a project, right? But we've got to get these things done because they're strategic priorities and they're things that have a potential impact on revenue, on profit, and on the future of our company. So I think, just in terms of communication, that's so important. So talk to me a little bit about like what or how was communication important to you, and what do you think? What are your thoughts around communication and like how do we communicate?
Yeah. So I always think about it like at the very beginning of the project, right? It starts with asking everyone that's on your project team how they want to communicate.
Oh yeah.
Some people are informal, some people are formal, some people like to text, some people like to call,
right?
And I think accommodating that is important for the success of the project and the communication. Keeps people from getting frustrated.
Right. And that clear communication, then there's no questions about what decision was made, when it was made.
Right.
You have to keep up with that.
Yeah. And understanding, when both, you need to communicate and when maybe you don't. Back off. Not everything needs to be a meeting.
Right. Yes, we all know
that. Like sometimes an email is fine. But also, making sure that you're building those personal connections. Yeah. Because it can just be a name at the end of an email sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think back to a conversation we had with Brian Murphy earlier, where we said you have to build credibility and build trust, right? So there's no reason why you have to use procurement. There's no reason why you have to use a PMO.
Yeah.
There's no reason why you have to use marketing.
Right.
And it's really about bringing something to the table and adding value.
Yeah.
So, maybe one thing that we do is we provide those tools and training and resources, right? So talk to me a little bit about training or how you kind of help build that muscle within the projects that you work on.
Sure. In training,
Yep.
in building project acumen out there.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think that, like, for me, falls into some of those mentorship projects, right? Where we have those different buckets of support levels. And it's really just about, probably meeting people where they are, and providing them with both the very practical tools of here is a project charter and how you fill it out, right? But also kind of selling the process, making them understand that this isn't just documentation for documentation's sake. It's to improve outcomes for the business.
And we've been very prescriptive about not forcing too much technology down people's throats. Like we have, we can manage off of a spreadsheet, right? So that's one thing I would say is, we try to meet them where they are. Like nobody can use project plan. Like it's too much for what we're trying to accomplish in certain instances. So really just, being able to say, hey, here's a charter and we skinny this down. We're not doing this because, we're not doing this because we have to, we're doing it because it's going to benefit you in the future. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that we've done a very good job of that for sure. Yeah. And then, if you think about, major, like one thing I think that is super interesting is how we've kind of worked with our finance department to get better at capital budgeting and tracking spending. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That and ROIs, I'd say, right? Like
that's a great
part
example
of that business justification.
Yep.
Of are we putting our resources towards the right projects? And are they on budget?
Right.
Like you need to be able to track spend.
Well, and it makes more sense because if you think about a business case, like everybody wants money to do the projects they want to do. But if you're able to come and say, hey, listen, we can help you with the business case. Right. We can help you justify how you're going to, what the benefit is for this project. It makes it much easier for either executives to make a decision that they want to invest in those projects.
Absolutely.
So what do you think are some of the big challenges just in general with project management in the PMO?
That's a big question.
What are some examples you've seen out there?
So I think like the biggest problem I find, especially for those longer format projects, right? I've had some projects that span years. Is keeping people engaged and motivated.
Yes.
And I think that in particular is one of those things that can be really difficult if you don't start right.
Yep. So what do you mean by start right?
I mean getting people excited for the initiative that you're bringing to the table, right? And making sure that they know clearly what their role in this project is.
And what's in it for them,
Exactly. What's in it for them, what's in it for their customers, what's in it for their building. There's a part of project management that I think like sometimes gets overlooked in that selling aspect.
Yep, that's a very good point. So, so when you're trying to keep people motivated, are you always kind of selling the benefits to it? I mean, a little bit of it is, hey, we've got to be our own cheerleader, but do you have a certain, how do you think about that motivation? Like, how do you keep it going?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think something you say often is like constant, gentle reminders.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah. It's gentle pressure relentlessly. I like to say gentle pressure relentlessly.
Yep, that's it. So I take a very similar approach in that I make sure that I'm talking about it all the time.
Yep.
And making sure that back to that communication piece, right? Like, is it a little bit more formal? Is it a little bit more informal? Am I having water cooler conversations?
Yeah.
Or, am I sending a very formal update? But yeah, I think getting people excited and engaged is one of those.
It is a big challenge.
One of those challenges.
Yeah.
That, is tough. Yeah, because this is essentially extra work that sometimes are asking people to take on beyond their responsibilities.
Yeah, and when you think about the PMO, the way that we've set it up, we have these different pillars of support that we go through. So you want to talk about the pillars and what we kind of offer in each one?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. So there's kind of two ways that we like to think about it, right? There's the pillars that involve
like governance and management,
right, the projects as they're initiated, what they're doing, and then what happens once the projects are out of our scope.
Yes, and I think that's a good point because what happens when a project is done has a beginning and it has an end. When the end is done, if you don't continue to provide, we found this out actually, if you don't continue to provide some support after the fact, it becomes shelfware. It becomes a process that's not continuing to progress forward.
Yeah.
So that whole back piece. But let's talk about the front piece more of like, hey, how do we think about if a project comes in? How do we think about what support we can provide them?
Sure. Yeah, it starts with that initiation, right?
Yep.
We're asking questions like, what is the initiative? Who is going to be the owner? Do you have an owner identified?
That's a great
for
point.
This project, right?
So what we found is, let me pause there because what we found is, you can have an IT owner if it's a system. You have an IT person that's going to be responsible for it, but you have to have a business owner because if the business doesn't understand what the system is doing, what we're trying to accomplish, it's going to be unusable. It really is.
Right.
So back to that. So who is the business owner, right? So we found out, hey, listen, we need to ask who the business owner is, not just the sponsor, but who owns that going forward. Okay. So then you say, who's the business owner? And then,
it ties into how much experience they have running projects.
Yes. That's a great point. Yes.
Like, hey, does the person that you want to work on this have the experience to see it through?
The
and make sure that it's successful. And there's certain actual characteristics that we also ask for in that initiation form that bucket them in either governance, management, or mentorship.
Yeah,
right?
And so the
if
three.
There's a high budget item, it needs to be with an experienced project owner. It's going to be in governance.
Yes.
Right. If there is a project that's being brought to us with somewhat experienced project owner, but they may need a little bit of support and tools, it falls into that mentorship bucket. And then if there's no one identified, it's in the management bucket.
Right.
And
what tends to happen.
Yep.
Right. So, I mean, we're able to either walk alongside them. Governance really is, hey, we had a big HR transformation project. They already had a project manager who knew this system backward and forward. So really we were in governance and we were just providing visibility to the senior leadership team on how that project was progressing. And we also were knocking down roadblocks because that's the other big thing is like part of governance is, hey, we're knocking down roadblocks. We're helping you accomplish what you need to get done. And then the mentorship is really walking alongside somebody, giving them tools, techniques, thoughts, and just helping them out. And then the management one is the one that we probably get the most involved in because we're actually functioning as a project manager.
Right.
So it's a unique structure, but again, what we're trying to do is really be a resource for everyone and be engaged as much as they want us to be engaged.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to, improve that project management acumen out in the field, right?
Absolutely.
Like, there's a lot of people that want to get stuff done.
And they just can't because they don't have the skills. Yeah.
Right. They don't know where to start. There's a lot of ambiguity there, right? And we can come in and it's low effort, low touch, and just provide tools and resources, which I think is a very valuable thing.
Yeah, and I think it's unique because not only are we, again, it's not compulsory. Nobody has to go through the PMO.
Right.
So we're building all those relationships out there, and again, proving time and time again that what we're providing is a value, so somebody else wants to use it.
Absolutely.
So when we started down the sustainability journey, I think they were like, hey, we've got this. By the end of it all, I think they said, every time we do a project, we're going to rely on the PMO for those services because it was such a value to be able to bring that skill set to them. Yeah. So then once a project's done, so it's done, right? What happens after that?
In terms of the support buckets, So we have these two support buckets, and one of them is post-project advocacy.
Okay.
And that's really built around process, right?
Yes.
Is there a process that we've implemented for a project that we still need visibility into, or the people that are owning that process need some sort of accountability or tools, right?
Or it might be that this phase of the project is done, but we know there's going to be other phases, right? And so we need to keep our keep those lines of communication open, because this is going to come around again, right? So I think about our profitability tool, and kind of that has multiple phases, so we assist with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And then there's a bucket around products and technology products that we aren't building in-house that still need support.
Yep.
And still need to be driven forward. And that's kind of the new program ownership.
What we will provide as support is we adopt those products, right? So talk about a little bit about FourKites, Vector, like what we've done around those products.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. They're Vector is a really exciting one. It's one that we're implementing right now.
So tell us a little bit about Vector.
Yeah. It's our contactless check-in, check-out product. Right?
It's like TSA pre-check for carriers.
Exactly. Yep. Yes. This is a driver-facing program that allows a driver to check in before they arrive to U.S. Cold digitally, and through any means that they deem necessary. Right? They can do it via text, where they don't have to do anything but text a number.
Oh yeah. Okay.
They can do it via an app, via their ELD device that's in their cab. So there's multiple ways for them to start the check-in, but it's essentially just a digital check-in and electronic bill of lading.
So theoretically, they might never have to leave their cab if they don't want to. Okay, I think that's the goal.
Yep.
Okay.
A lot of faster through the gate. Same with TSA pre-check, right? And then less walking back and forth to the shipping and receiving office for paperwork. Hey, I have a question. Sometimes even. We'll have to walk 50 doors and Chicago winter. It's not fun.
Well, we kind of got to thinking about it during COVID because, there was this whole hesitancy. Nobody wanted to go inside, right? Nobody wanted to and unfortunately, in order to get paperwork, in order to check in, you had to go inside. Somebody had to get out of the cab. So I think that was, kind of here's our problem. And we found, very innovatively, we found this great solution. Right.
Yeah.
So we've now started implementing it.
Right.
So.
And, in thinking about, beyond implementation, right? This thing there's a ton of potential.
Right.
And
it needs
a
project.
Yeah. It's a project that a product, once the project's done, that needs ownership.
Right.
And needs people driving it forward.
So how are you going to go about doing, like, how do you think about, product ownership and what you're going to do to drive that product forward?
Yeah. I'd probably go back to my approach to solving problems in general, where, I always start with empathizing with the people that use the product.
Yeah.
Right? Putting myself in their shoes, not just looking at data, not just looking at numbers, not just talking to one person and saying, oh, that's it. It's really about getting multiple perspectives and building something. And thinking about problems in a way that puts yourself in the user or the consumer's shoes.
And then especially getting that feedback from users and from consumers and being able to say, hey, listen, I know these 3 or 4 things we need to get done. How do we prioritize these? And how do I communicate back to the vendor?
Yep. And then how do you quickly, show that process and make sure that it's right?
Yes.
Right? Like, can you prototype quickly and say, hey, is this what you wanted or no?
Originally, the scope of the PMO was to move projects forward that were a strategic imperative for the company, right? And I think one of the things that has been an outcome of doing some of these projects is we are now kind of thinking more about design-led thinking, human thinking, and how we can, incorporate that process into our PMO.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on design thinking and how do you think that would benefit us?
Yeah. I mean, I think, like I've been talking about a lot in this session, right? It starts with putting yourself as the consumer, right? Empathizing, understanding what their problems are, not assuming, and going out and seeing those problems, not just looking at information, right? And then from there, you have to define the problem, right? And not start to think about outcomes.
Yes.
Right? You have to really spend time understanding the issue. and looking at it from multiple angles, because it's really easy to see an issue and then quickly come to the solution and say, yep, this is it.
And I think that, we do a lot of our own software development. So I think that people start coding before they've even, in the old days, they started coding before you even finished telling them what the problem was, because they'd already solved it in their mind, So I think being a good listener and understanding where they're coming from.
You have to frame the problem to understand what you're even solving for, right? And then, I think probably the most exciting part about it is kind of that ideation phase, right? Where like you're spending 80% of your time trying to figure out what the problem really is. Because, probably what you thought the problem wasn't really the problem.
Right.
And you need to look at it at multiple angles. But when you get to the ideation phase, it's fun because, you're not just focused on one idea. You're trying to get out as many bad ideas as you possibly can, right? Like 1,000 bad ideas, there's going to be, 10 good ones as opposed to 5, well thought out ideas where you're taking your time. And, you start to move quickly in that process where you're thinking less and kind of brainstorming and just throwing stuff at the wall.
Yeah, because that's when great ideas happen, when you can be innovative and think through that and say, here are the, we've thrown
creative.
Because, oftentimes, people come to us and say, hey, I have a project, I have a problem, but we haven't stepped back to say,
and maybe they start with the solution.
Right.
Yeah. Even worse, right? They say, here's the solution to, this problem that we have. And, sometimes it just doesn't work the way it's intended.
Exactly. And so I think just, as we move forward and incorporating this and, starting to kind of vet out projects, sometimes we need to take a step back and say, hey, rather than trying to solve this problem and what the answer is, let's take a step back and unpack it and see what else we need to come up with. Because it could be that it's not going to be solved by a system. Yeah. Maybe it's solved by a process.
Exactly.
Right.
And then, once you have a bunch of ideas out there, you can start to, prototype and test those ideas.
When you think about starting a PMO, like maybe your organization doesn't have one, maybe you want to just add more structure to the organization. What are some tips, or what's some advice you can give someone who maybe wants to justify this or wants to dip their toe in the water of a project management organization?
Right. I mean, I'd think about the complexity of the organization, right? Like what kind of resources are you going to need?
Yep. And for example, we when we started the PMO, we basically said, hey, listen, the scope is these strategic projects, right? We didn't get involved in IT. We didn't get involved in construction. Yeah. We had to, because we just quite frankly didn't have the resources.
Right. Yeah. We have great people in engineering that know what they're doing. Right. We don't need to get involved there.
Exactly.
Great people downstairs in those IT roles that we don't really need to get involved with.
Exactly. And we limited because we aren't going to get involved in, a software upgrade to something, right? We want to get involved when there's a process, when there's a program that we can influence.
Or something we need to buy.
Yep.
Right? Yeah. I think there's some serious considerations there on the scope, right? And then understanding, if you need to, go out there and get some more resources for building your project management office. Yeah. Understanding what type of documentation you're going to use, what type of tools you're going to use. As we mentioned before, we decided to go simple.
Yes.
There's some projects where I use Jira and Confluence, right? But if I'm, just using an Excel form or,
just to get that that initial muscle.
Start simple.
Yep.
Yeah.
You really can. You can start simple. I'm a PMP project manager. I grew up in project management. That's why I kind of have a passion for this. But I would say, the PMP, the Project Management Institute, PMI, is a great resource. They have all sorts of tools out there that you can, take and kind of make them into your own, right?
Yeah. And I think making them your own is an important part of making it work for your business.
Yeah. And I think too, we talked about building relationships and being collaborative. And I think even, as we start to think about 2024 and looking for new projects, one thing that we do is we like to sit down with all the heads of our departments and say, hey, what kind of capital are you budgeting for this year? Hey, what kind of projects do you want to get done this year? so that we can get ahead of it and be able to find those resources.
Yeah, and maybe there's things that they would like to do, but don't budget for because they're like, I don't have the people or expertise or tools to do this.
Yep.
And that's really where a project management office can come in and say, hey,
we can help you with that. Right.
Yeah.
And we can get this done.
Absolutely.
And I think, and again, just the visibility and the accessibility of those tools and information. Like we have a whole SharePoint page that, has, we basically said, hey, listen, we have everything under the sun, right? If you want to start a project, we have a project charter. Even if you don't use us, come and use our tools, because it just helps you, make that project successful.
Of course.
Because what we don't want is we never want a project to fail.
Right. We're focused on the outcomes.
Yep.
Always. And measure ourselves against those outcomes, definitely.
And, when a project ends and, we're going to put in post-project advocacy, we're going to do program ownership. But we typically always do lessons learned.
Of course. Yeah. If you're not looking back at yourself, like what are you doing,
Yes.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that you would say, or you could take away from a project as a lesson learned?
So I think that probably the most impactful one was really related to a change in process around the way we approach all of the different stakeholders that need to get involved when we're buying an IT product.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So we oftentimes in the early stages of the project management office would buy something, buy a product, and then let IT know after, right? And I think one of the very simple lessons learned early on was, when we're buying this product, we should probably let cybersecurity know. We should probably consult with networking to see if there's any hardware implications, even if it's a cloud product, let's say.
Yeah, because you just think, somebody else is handling that. But it does have ramifications down the road. Yes,
I think that was one of the more impactful lessons learned from projects early on.
And I think, I think we established from cyber, here's a list of things, like here's a criteria and checklist you have to go through to make sure that they are compliant with us, so we don't put ourselves at risk.
We built a process, right? Because we were having issues, and we built a process, based on those lessons learned that was in collaboration with all of those people, and has been working really well.
Yeah, and I just, I think when I think about the PMO office and kind of the journey that we've taken or the evolution that's gone through, I think, no matter what department you're in, every department has projects. So it's great to be able to learn, kind of the breadth and the scope of our operations, because you get to touch all different things. You get to be involved in all these different projects. And I just think it's a great way to get a holistic view of your company.
Oh, 100%.
And I think, and again, we're building credibility, but we're also building relationships that can only benefit you in the future.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great, that's kind of a great concept for you guys to think about is, if you want to start a PMO, it's getting stuff done, but it's also, just benefiting you. Because I think when somebody new comes in,
you learn a lot.
You get a taste of everything. And I think that's a real big benefit. So thank you so much, Eddie, for joining me. I love it. And it was a great conversation. I think we learned a lot. I think we learned a lot about just kind of the PMO structure, kind of what it's built for and intended for at US Cold, but then how you can take that back to your company and maybe do something a little bit different. Not a lot of structure. Not a lot of structure and kind of, conforming to this process, but more thinking about how can I get involved and add value, and how do I have space and resources to be able to think about change management, think about the design thinking concept. So there's a lot more to come, and we are continuing to evolve it. But you guys now have the tools that we have. So if you want to start a PMO, I think this is a great opportunity to listen to it. So thank you to my guest, Eddie Russell, and until next time on the ColdCast, stay cold.